King Draven Ashmoor believed there was nothing in the world he could not control. He had outlived dynasties, buried enemies whose names had been erased from history, ruled over shadows that bent and twisted when he commanded them to. He had survived wars that reshaped continents, betrayals that would have shattered lesser kings, and the slow, inevitable decay of empires that once swore loyalty at his feet. Across 8 centuries of immortality, he had never truly lost, until the night he became a father, because for all his power, there was one place in his vast stone castle where his authority meant nothing. A quiet wing, sealed away from the echoes of court politics and ancient violence. A single room where his son spent his days in stillness. The boy would sit for hours, watching pale light slide across the stone walls. Not crying, not calling out, just watching. The world continued without him. King Draven had faced monsters without flinching, creatures born of darkness, rage, and blood. But the silence of that room terrified him. It wasn't the kind of silence that followed death. It was worse. It was a silence of something alive, but unreachable. So Draven did what he had always done when fear appeared. He built systems. He created oversight. He made the invisible visible. Hidden cameras were installed where servants would never think to look. Above doorways, inside light fixtures, behind carved stone reliefs that had watched over generations of kings. Quiet eyes that never blinked, watching his son when he could not bring himself to stay. From a chamber deep within the castle, Draven monitored every movement, every shift of posture, every flicker of light across the boy's face. It felt responsible. It felt protective. It felt like love. And for a while, nothing changed. The boy remained distant. The room remained quiet. And the king remained behind his screens. Until one evening, the castle gates opened for someone new. A human woman stepped inside the ancient walls. She did not bow the way others did not lower her eyes beneath the weight of the castle's age and authority. She did not treat the child like something fragile, or broken, or in need of constant correction. She sat on the floor. She spoke to him like a person. She laughed when he made sound that echoed strangely through the stone room, and the cameras, built to protect, began to capture something far more dangerous than harm. They captured connection. Moments no system could measure. Responses no data could explain. A glance, a smile, a sound that almost became laughter. From behind his screens, King Draven watched his son come alive in ways he never had before. And for the first time in centuries, the immortal king felt something he did not know how to fight. Not fear, not rage, but the slow, crushing realization that everything his son needed was something no camera could provide, because watching was not the same as being there. And the truth King Draven Ashmoor had spent his immortal life running from was finally staring back at him from the screen. The castle had survived everything. Earthquakes that split the land beneath it, wars that burned kingdoms to ash, centuries of rulers who came and went like passing storms. But within its oldest wing, there was a room the castle itself seemed to hold its breath around. That was where Finn lived. The boy was small for his age, pale, even by human standards. His movements were careful, deliberate, as if the world might shatter if he moved too quickly. Physicians from every corner of the realm had examined him. Some whispered about rare conditions of the mind. Others blamed the unnatural nature of his birth. A few dared to suggest that immortality had poisoned something fragile and human. None of them could explain why Finn barely spoke, why sound seemed to overwhelm him, why touch made him withdraw instead of reaching back. And none of them could tell King Draven how to fix it. That was the part that hollowed him. Because King Draven Ashmoor did not fail. He conquered problems. He eradicated threats. He bent chaos into order. Yet, when it came to his son, there was nothing to conquer, only something to understand. And Draven did not know how. He visited the boys' room every night, always at the same hour, always for the same length of time. He would stand just inside the doorway, his presence filling the space like a shadow that never quite crossed the floor. Finn rarely looked up. When he did, his eyes would pass over his father as if Draven were part of the stone walls, permanent, unmoving, distant. Draven told himself it was enough to be there, that his son would feel protection the way mortals felt the warmth of the sun. But protection without connection is just another form of distance. Servants were instructed to keep noise to a minimum. Toys were chosen for their simplicity. Schedules were enforced with military precision. Everything about Finn's life was designed to reduce risk, and in doing so, it reduced life. Draven believed he was saving his son from a world that would overwhelm him. What he did not realize was that he was slowly erasing that world entirely. At night, when the castle slept, Draven returned to his control chamber. Dozens of screens glowed in the dark. Each one showed a different angle of Finn's existence. The boy sitting alone. The boy eating in silence. The boy staring at nothing for long, unbroken stretches of time. Draven watched for hours, not because something was wrong, but because he was afraid of what might happen if he looked away. This was how he loved. From a distance, through systems, through vigilance. He convinced himself that if he could see everything, nothing bad could happen. But love doesn't work that way. And deep down, beneath centuries of hardened resolve, King Draven knew the truth. He refused a name. For all his power, for all his control, he could rule the night, but he could not reach his son. The castle learned to whisper. That was the first thing the caregivers noticed. Not because anyone told them to be quiet, but because sound seemed to die on its own inside those walls. Footsteps softened on stone. Voices dropped instinctively. Even laughter, when it escaped by accident, felt like a trespass. One by one, they arrived. Some came with thick books and careful theories, convinced the boy could be solved if approached correctly. They brought charts, schedules, measured exercises meant to coax responses from a child who did not respond on command. Others came with forced brightness, overly gentle smiles, voices raised too high, too cheerful, as if enthusiasm alone could bridge the distance between them and the quiet boy sitting on the floor. A few came already afraid of the castle, afraid of the king, afraid of making mistakes that could cost them their lives. Finn felt all of it. He felt the tension in their hands when they tried to guide him. He felt the impatience hidden behind kindness. He felt the way every interaction came with an expectation. Say this, look here, respond now. When he didn't, the air grew heavy. Some caregivers tried to fill the silence with words. Others tried to break it with noise. Neither worked. They spoke at him, not with him. They followed instructions, not intuition. They treated his quiet like a problem to be corrected instead of a language to be learned. Days passed in repetition. A caregiver would sit beside him, carefully close but never truly present, offering toys chosen by committee, textures approved by physicians, sounds tested and retested for safety. Finn would glance once, then turn away. Hours would stretch, and eventually, the caregiver would begin to fail. Not loudly, not dramatically. They failed in the smallest ways. A sigh when Finn didn't respond. A glance toward the door. A moment where their attention drifted elsewhere. Finn noticed every one of them. The castle did too. Some caregivers stayed weeks. Some lasted months. A few barely made it through their first night. They left quietly, escorted out through corridors that seemed eager to forget them. And every departure confirmed what Draven already feared. No one could reach his son. From his chamber of screens, the king watched it all unfold. He watched caregivers kneel too stiffly, speak too quickly, retreat too soon. He watched Finn curl inward, smaller each day, like a flame learning how to survive without oxygen. Draven told himself he was being careful, that allowing distance was safer, that intervention could wait. That presence, if done wrong, might do more harm than good. So he watched. When caregivers failed, he did not confront them. He dismissed them, quietly, efficiently. Another variable removed, another problem contained. But with each failure, the silence grew thicker. Meals were eaten without conversation. Playtime became routine. Days blurred into one another, marked only by the movement of light across stone. Finn stopped reacting altogether. He no longer flinched at new faces. He no longer showed curiosity when toys were placed beside him. It was as if he had learned something the adults around him had not. That connection was temporary, and distance was safer. Draven saw this too. He saw his son becoming still in a way that frightened even an immortal king. And yet, he did not step forward, because stepping forward meant risk. It meant being seen. It meant being rejected. It meant discovering that even he, ruler of a night, might not be enough. So the castle remained full of people and empty of connection, a place where footsteps echoed, voices softened, and a child learned how to disappear in plain sight. And somewhere behind the walls, unseen and unquestioned, the cameras kept watching, waiting. The decision did not come in a moment of rage or panic. It arrived quietly, the way all Draven's most dangerous choices did. One night, after watching Finn sit unmoving for hours, eyes tracing patterns only he could see, the king stood alone in the control chamber and acknowledged the truth he refused to speak aloud. He could not always be there. And if he could not be there, then something else would have to be. The castle was ancient, but adapted easily to new secrets. Artisans were summoned under the guise of restoration. Stoneworkers carved with careful precision. Electricians moved through corridors after midnight, guided by maps no one else ever saw. Cameras were embedded where beauty already drew the eye. Inside, sculpted gargoyles whose mouths gaped eternally. Behind, decorative sconces shaped like torches that had never burned. Within, the carved halos of saints long forgotten by history. They were placed high, angled carefully, never intrusive. They watched doorways, corners, the spaces where Finn paused before sitting, the places he returned to again and again. Draven oversaw every detail. He selected lenses that could see in near darkness, systems that recorded without sound, so nothing would startle the boy, feeds that could be accessed instantly from anywhere in the castle. He told himself it was vigilance. He told himself it was necessary. If Finn fell, the cameras would see it. If a caregiver crossed a boundary, the cameras would record it. If something changed, even subtly, Draven would know. Nothing would slip past him again. And with each camera installed, the king felt a small easing in his chest, a sense of order returning. Watching became ritual. He monitored Finn while attending council meetings, while standing on balconies overlooking forests that once trembled at his name, while lying awake through endless nights when sleep refused to come. The screens became his presence. Where his body could not go, his eyes followed. He convinced himself that love could be distilled into observation, that protection could be perfected if nothing went unseen. But the castle grew colder, not in temperature, in feeling. Finn's world shrank into something curated and contained, every movement preserved but untouched. And then, quietly, without ceremony, the woman arrived. She came with no entourage, no excessive credentials, no practiced reverence of the power housed within those walls. She was human, ordinary in the way mortals often were. And from the moment she stepped into the nursery, something shifted. She did not stand over Finn. She did not call his name to demand attention. She looked at the room first. The way light pooled near the window, the objects Finn gravitated toward, the spaces he avoided. Then she sat down, right on the cold stone floor. No cushion, no distance. She didn't reach for him. She didn't speak right away. She simply existed at his level. Finn noticed, not immediately, but differently than before. He turned his head just enough to acknowledge movement where movement didn't usually linger. The woman picked up a small object from the floor, not a toy chosen by doctors, but something ordinary, textured, imperfect. She tapped it gently against the stone. Once, twice, paused. Finn's fingers twitched. From behind the screens, Draven leaned forward. The woman smiled, not at the boy, but at the sound, as if the sound itself mattered. She waited. When Finn shifted closer, she didn't celebrate, didn't praise, didn't rush the moment. She let it breathe. She spoke softly, not instructions, not encouragement, just observations, about the echo, about the light, about how cold the floor must feel. Her voice rose and fell naturally, without agenda. Finn listened, and then, impossibly, he responded, not with words, with presence. He sat closer. He watched her hands. He mirrored the sound. From a control chamber, Draven felt something tighten in his chest. The cameras recorded everything. The way Finn stayed. The way he didn't retreat. The way his stillness changed. No longer empty, but attentive. This was not compliance. This was connection. And it unsettled the king more than any threat ever had. Because the woman had done in minutes what centuries of power could not. She had reached his son, without command, without control, without watching from a distance. She had simply been there, and the cameras, silent and unblinking, captured it all, not as proof of danger, but as evidence of everything Draven had been missing. She returned the next day, and the day after that. No announcement was made when she entered the nursery. No ritual preceded her arrival. She didn't wait to be instructed or corrected. She simply appeared at the same hour each morning and did the same unexpected thing. She sat on the floor, not near Finn, not far from him, just close enough to share the same space. She learned the room before she tried to change it, learned how the light crept across the stone at different hours, learned which sounds echoed too sharply and which dissolved into softness, learned the quiet rhythm of Finn's movements, the moments when he withdrew and the moments when he lingered. She never hurried him. When Finn turned away, she stayed. When he ignored her, she stayed. When he left the space between them empty, she let it remain empty. And slowly, that space stopped feeling like a void. She spoke, but not in the way the others had. She didn't ask questions that demanded answers. Didn't narrate his behavior as if he were an experiment. Didn't fill the air to protect herself from silence. She spoke as if silence were already enough. She described small things, the way dust caught in sunlight, the sound of footsteps far down the corridor, the coolness of stone through thin fabric. Sometimes she spoke to Finn. Sometimes she spoke to no one at all. And sometimes she said nothing. Finn listened, at first, only peripherally, the way one listens for danger, but then differently. His shoulders softened. His breathing slowed. He began to stay longer in the room when she was there. The caregivers before her had tried to pull him forward. She let him arrive on his own. When Finn made sounds, low, uncertain hums that barely qualified his voice, she didn't correct him. She didn't clap or celebrate or push for more. She answered them. A hum for a hum. A tap for a tap. A conversation built from fragments. From a control chamber, King Draven watched with growing unease. There were no dramatic breakthroughs, no sudden transformations, just a steady, unmistakable shift. Finn began to move differently when she entered. He positioned himself closer, without being guided. He watched her face, not with the vacant gaze Draven knew so well, but with focus, interest. One afternoon, the woman lay back on the stone floor and traced shapes in the air with her finger, following cracks in the ceiling as if they were constellations. She spoke softly about stars she'd seen as a child, about how they looked close enough to touch but never were. Finn crawled toward her, not quickly, not confidently, but deliberately. He stopped just short of her shoulder and sat there, close enough that their sleeves brushed. She didn't move, didn't turn her head. She let the moment exist without claiming it. Draven felt something twist inside him. This was not training. This was not technique. This was something else. Something intimate. Something alive. The cameras captured Finn's hand lifting, hesitating, then resting against the fabric of her sleeve. A touch. Brief. Tentative. Real. Draven looked away from the screen. Only for a moment. When he looked back, the woman was still there, eyes closed, breathing slow, as if she trusted the world not to take the moment away. Finn remained beside her. In the days that followed, the pattern deepened. He began to anticipate her arrival. He waited. The silence in the room changed. It no longer pressed down. It opened. Finn made eye contact now. Briefly, but intentionally. Once, when she laughed softly at something he did, he laughed too. The sound startled them both. She froze, afraid to scare it away. Finn smiled. Not wide, not performative. Just enough. From behind layers of stone and screens, the Vampire King felt something crack, because he realized then what she had done. She had not fixed his son. She had met him. She had not demanded change. She had offered companionship. And in doing so, she had broken the pattern the castle had enforced for so long. The pattern of distance disguised as care. The woman who sat on the floor had not challenged Draven's authority. She had exposed it by proving that the thing Finn needed most was not protection. It was presence. And for the first time since installing the cameras, King Draven Ashmoor began to wonder whether watching was no longer enough. It happened without ceremony. No one announced it. No bells rang. No threshold was crossed. The sound emerged the way light does at dawn, quietly enough that you almost miss it if you aren't already watching. The woman had brought nothing new into the room that day. No toys selected for stimulation. No exercises designed to provoke response. Just herself. She sat on the floor as she always did, legs folded, hands resting loosely in her lap. Finn lingered nearby, closer now than he had ever been to anyone else, his attention flickering between her face and the space around them. She began to hum, not a song with words, not a melody anyone had taught her, just a soft, wandering sound, rising and falling, uncertain, alive. Finn stilled. The sound didn't demand anything of him. It didn't rush him forward or push him back. It simply existed. She tapped her fingers gently against the stone in time with the hum. Once, twice, then paused, as if listening for something unseen. Finn tapped too, not deliberately at first, more like an echo finding its source. The woman smiled, but she didn't look at him. She kept humming, adjusted her rhythm slightly, slowed it, softened it. Finn tapped again. This time, he watched her hands. The pattern formed between them. Sound, pause, response. A game without rules. An invitation without pressure. The hum became lighter, almost playful. Finn's shoulders loosened. And then, something slipped through the quiet that had held him for so long. A small sound, uncertain, half-formed. It startled even him. The woman froze, not out of fear, but care, the way one holds still around something fragile. Finn made the sound again. It grew, not loud, not confident, but unmistakable. Laughter, thin at first, like something rediscovering how to exist. It bubbled up from his chest, surprised and uneven, as if he hadn't expected it to come out at all. The woman's eyes filled instantly. She didn't clap, didn't cheer, didn't speak. She laughed too, softly, carefully, matching the sound instead of overpowering it. Finn laughed again. This time it stayed. The sound filled the room in a way nothing else ever had. It bounced off stone that had only known whispers. It settled into corners long accustomed to silence. From a control chamber, King Draven Ashmoor stopped breathing. The cameras caught everything. Finn's face, no longer distant, no longer closed. The way his mouth curved upward without instruction. The way his eyes lit with something dangerously close to joy. Draven's hand trembled where it rested against the console. He had watched battles end in blood, watched cities burn, watched centuries collapse into dust. None of it compared to this, because this sound, this laughter, was not something he could command or summon. It was a gift, one he had not known how to give. The woman leaned back, letting the laughter fade naturally, not chasing it, not demanding more. She let the moment complete itself. Finn lingered in the aftermath. He looked at her then, not briefly, not cautiously. He looked at her the way one looks at someone they recognize. Something fundamental shifted inside the room, and inside the king watching from afar. Because in that single fragile sound, Draven understood something that unsettled him more than any threat ever had. His son was not unreachable. He had simply been waiting, for warmth instead of vigilance. And the first laughter in months echoed through the castle, not as noise, but as proof that something alive had finally begun to wake. Elena never asked for the schedule. She learned it, of course. The castle made sure of that, but she did not obey it in the way the others had. Finn's days had always been measured in clean divisions, meals at fixed hours, rest periods timed to the minute, interactions carefully limited, carefully logged. The structure was meant to keep him safe. Elena treated it like a suggestion. If Finn lingered over a meal, she stayed. If he lost interest halfway through an activity, she let it dissolve. If he wanted to sit in silence longer than allotted, she sat with him. No one corrected her at first. From the outside, nothing she did looked wrong. But from behind the screens, King Draven noticed everything. The way she ignored the clock when Finn was engaged. The way she abandoned tasks mid-step if his attention drifted. The way she responded to his cues instead of directing them. She did not push progress. She followed curiosity. One afternoon, Finn became absorbed in the sound of dripping water from a hairline crack near the window. The schedule dictated that it was time to transition. Play concluded, rest enforced. Elena did not move. She knelt beside him and listened. Together, she matched the rhythm of the drops by tapping her finger lightly against a stone. When the drip changed pace, she adjusted without comment. When it stopped altogether, she didn't replace it with something else. She waited to see what Finn would do. Draven watched, irritation stirring beneath his calm. This was inefficient, unmeasured, unrecorded. There was no data to capture from moments like this. No clear outcome. Yet Finn remained present, more present than he had ever been during perfectly executed routines. The contrast became impossible to ignore. Where the castle ran on predictability, Elena embraced uncertainty. Where Draven planned for every outcome, she allowed moments to unfold. Where he protected by control, she cared by attention. And it worked. Finn began to initiate. He brought her objects without instruction. He guided her hand to textures he wanted to feel again. He led her, slowly, through his world. These moments never appeared on any schedule. They could not be replicated on command. They existed only when Finn felt safe enough to invite someone in. Draven felt a strange resentment bloom in his chest. Not toward Elena. Toward the truth she represented. He had spent centuries believing that control was the highest form of responsibility, that if he anticipated every danger, planned every response, nothing could slip through his grasp. Yet here was a woman undoing months of rigid care simply by paying attention, not to outcomes, but to him. One evening, a servant gently reminded Elena that it was time to conclude the session. Elena looked at Finn. Finn did not look at the servant. He tightened his grip on Elena's sleeve, just slightly, a quiet refusal. Elena nodded once. "We can wait a minute," she said softly. The servant hesitated, then stepped back. From the control chamber, Draven felt something fracture. Because in that small act, that single unrecorded deviation, Elena had given Finn something the castle never had. Choice. Not structured, not measured, not controlled. Earned. And Finn responded the only way a child can when they are finally heard. He stayed. Draven stared at the screens long after the moment passed. The systems he had built were flawless. The schedules were perfect. And yet they had never made space for the one thing Elena gave freely. Care that wasn't designed. Care that wasn't optimized. Care that didn't come from fear of what might happen if something went wrong, but from trust that something right might happen if you let it. And for the first time since installing the cameras, King Draven Ashmoor felt the unsettling certainty that the order he had imposed on his son's life was not protecting him. It was holding him back. The control chamber had always felt like safety. Stone walls thick enough to mute the rest of the castle. Screens arranged with perfect symmetry. A place where nothing surprised him. King Draven spent more time there now than anywhere else. He told himself it was vigilance. But as days passed, the screens began to change. Not in what they showed, but in what they reflected. Finn moved through the nursery with a quiet confidence he had never known before. He sought Elena out. He lingered near her even when she wasn't engaging him. He initiated moments that no camera could predict, and Draven watched it all. He watched Finn bring her a stone he had found near the window, offering it without instruction. He watched Elena accept it as if it were precious. He watched the way Finn's posture straightened when she acknowledged him. The king leaned closer to the screens, not to protect, to understand. But understanding never came. Instead, something else did. He began to notice how often he wasn't there, how his presence existed only as a shadow on glass. how his son's world had expanded, and how he remained outside of it. The cameras showed Finn laughing now. Not often, but enough. Each time, it felt like something slipping through Draven's fingers. He had built the systems to prevent loss. Yet this was loss of a different kind. One evening, the screen showed Elena sitting beside Finn, doing nothing at all. No activity, no engagement, just shared stillness. Finn leaned against her. His head rested briefly against her shoulder. Draven's breath caught. The cameras captured the moment perfectly. High definition, multiple angles, time-stamped, but no part of it belonged to him. He realized then that the screens had become a mirror. They showed him exactly who he was. A king who observed instead of participated. A father who monitored instead of held. A presence defined by distance. He had convinced himself that being aware was the same as being involved. That knowing was the same as caring. But the truth stared back at him, unblinking. Everything meaningful in his son's life was happening on the other side of the glass. Draven reached out once, almost unconsciously, his hand hovering near the surface of the screen as Finn shifted closer to Elena. The gesture was useless. His hand meant nothing. Stone, air, distance. For centuries, Draven had believed that immortality meant never being forced to choose, that there would always be time later. Another night, another century. But Finn was mortal, and moments like these did not wait. The realization settled heavily in his chest. He was not protecting his son. He was postponing himself. Every laugh he watched instead of shared. Every moment he archived instead of lived. Every step Elena took closer, while he remained exactly where he was. The screens glowed softly in the dark, and for the first time since he had installed them, King Draven Ashmoor understood their true purpose. They were not windows into his son's life. They were walls, and he had built them himself. She noticed that the way people noticed things they were never meant to see. Not all at once. At first, it was a feeling, a faint pressure in the room, as if the walls were listening too closely. Elena had learned the nursery silence as well. She knew which ones belonged to Finn, which ones belonged to the castle itself. This silence felt different. Her eyes drifted, not searching, just curious. A pause too long near a sconce. A shadow that didn't shift with the light. A reflection where there shouldn't have been one. She didn't say anything that day, or the next. She waited, and once she saw it, she couldn't stop seeing it. The small, careful adjustments. The way certain fixtures never gathered dust. The way Finn sometimes glanced toward corners she had never pointed out. The watching wasn't loud. It was constant. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear. Betrayal. She finished the afternoon with Finn as she always did. Sat with him. Let him guide the moment. When he leaned into her side, she stayed still even as her thoughts churned. When she finally stood to leave, she looked directly at the wall. Not accusing. Not angry. Just aware. That night, she asked to see the king. The request unsettled the castle. Servants hesitated. Messages were passed more carefully than usual. When she was finally led into the throne room, the vast space felt less imposing and the truth pressing between them. King Draven stood waiting. Alone. You're watching him, Elena said. Not a question. The words echoed longer than they should have. Draven did not deny it. They are for his protection, he replied, voice measure controlled. Nothing more. Elena's expression didn't change. How long? She asked. Since before you arrived. She exhaled slowly, as if steadying herself. He trusts me, she said. He trusts this room. Do you have any idea what it took for him to do that? Draven's jaw tightened. I know everything that happens in that room. That's the problem, she said softly. You know, but you're not there. Silence fell between them. The kind that no camera could capture. You didn't tell me, Elena continued. You didn't give him a choice. You didn't give me one. Draven stepped forward slightly, authority rising instinctively. He is my son. And he is a child, she said. Not a subject. Not a threat to be managed. The words struck deeper than she intended, or perhaps exactly as deep as they needed to. You're teaching him something, Elena went on, her voice steady but strained. That every moment of safety is conditional. That every connection is monitored. That being close always comes with unseen eyes. Draven opened his mouth. Stopped, because for the first time, the systems he relied on had no answer prepared. Elena's gaze hardened, not with anger, but with grief. I sat on that floor because it was the only place he felt equal, she said. Because he needed to know that someone was choosing to be with him, not assigned to observe him. She shook her head slowly. You can't heal someone while you're spying on them. The word landed like a blade. Draven felt it then, the fracture he had been circling for weeks. The realization that what he called protection had violated something fragile and sacred. Take them down, Elena said. It wasn't a demand. It was a boundary. If you want me to stay, she added quietly, the watching has to stop. The trust that had grown so carefully between stone walls and shared silence cracked in that moment, not because Elena raised her voice, but because the truth had. Draven looked away, and in that brief movement, that failure to answer, Elena understood everything. She turned to leave. Behind her, the king stood frozen, surrounded by a power that suddenly felt meaningless. Because for the first time since installing the cameras, King Draven Ashmoor was no longer the one watching. He was the one being seen. And the cost of that revelation was trust, shattered not by cruelty, but by fear disguised as love. The control chamber was dark. The screen still glowed, but Draven no longer looked at them. Their light fell harsh now, intrusive, like a room full of eyes that refused to blink. He stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of machines he had once trusted more than his own instincts. Every feed showed the same thing it always had. Finn sitting on the floor, Elena nearby, the world continuing without him. Except now, Elena was gone. The space beside Finn was empty, and for the first time, the king did not reach for a console. He turned away. The walk to the nursery felt longer than any journey he had taken in centuries. Each corridor carried memories of distance, doors he had paused behind, thresholds he had never crossed. The castle did not whisper this time. It waited. When Draven reached the room, he stopped. Not because he was afraid of Finn, because he was afraid of himself. The door stood open. Finn sat where he always did, fingers tracing familiar patterns along the stone floor. He did not look up when his father entered. He did not flinch. He simply continued what he was doing, as if the room had accepted Draven before the boy ever could. Draven stepped inside. No crown, no guards, no commands. He closed the door behind him. The sound was final. He stood there awkwardly, painfully aware of his height, his presence, the centuries he carried in his posture. He had faced armies with less uncertainty than he felt now. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to the floor. The stone was cold through his clothing, unforgiving. Real, he sat, not near Finn, not far, just close enough to share the same space. Minutes passed. Draven did not speak. He did not reach out. He did not watch for reactions. He listened, not for danger, not for change, but for Finn. The boy shifted slightly. A glance, quick and cautious, flickered in Draven's direction. The king kept his eyes on the floor. Not avoidance, respect. He picked up a small stone near his hand, one Finn had played with countless times, and rolled it gently across the floor. Not toward the boy, not away, just there. The stone made a soft sound as it turned. Finn watched. Draven waited. After a moment, Finn nudged the stone back with his fingers. Draven felt his breath catch. No screen recorded this. No system preserved it. The moment existed only because both of them were there. They rolled the stone back and forth, slowly, without rhythm or expectation. A simple exchange. Equal, shared. Draven's movements were clumsy at first. He resisted the instinct to guide, to control, to turn the moment into something measurable. He let it be small. Finn leaned closer, not touching, but near, close enough that Draven could feel the warmth of him through the air. For centuries, Draven had believed that protection meant standing between his son and the world. Now, he understood something else. Protection could also mean sitting beside him and letting the world exist. Finn rested his hand briefly on the stone between them, then left it there. An invitation. Draven did not hesitate. He placed his hand down too. Their fingers did not touch, but they were close enough to feel each other's presence. The castle breathed, and in that quiet room, with no cameras watching, no systems recording, King Draven Ashmoor finally did the one thing his power had never taught him how to do. He stayed, not as a king, not as a watcher, but as a father. And for the first time, presence replaced surveillance, not with certainty, but with something far more fragile. Trust, and it was enough.